Ladies and gentlemen, my esteemed colleagues, it is a pleasure for me to launch this one-day conference. And although we are in a rather cozy premises, I think these are also quite welcoming premises. And what we will strive to do is to cover the topic of heritage protection for the future. And my task is to give the opening address, where I will probably touch upon the topics to be later discussed in more detail. Faith and culture is a phenomenon that in a way puts the human experience in certain frame. And consciously or unconsciously, a human being has always wanted to live and to work in a convenient, rational, and aesthetically valuable environment, a place which has its past. And each period of time leaves its memorials, certain footprint in our space, which enriches the space around us. The cultural heritage is a sum of humanity's achievements. Sometimes it's underestimated resource, power, and energy. However, humankind cannot exist without its memory and heritage. And the understanding of our future is based on our memories of the past. Without them, we only are left stranded in the present. Europe is the only place in the world where we have such a huge density of cultural heritage. This is proven by the UNESCO World Heritage List and also the map. And Europe has been the birthplace of professional architecture, and for centuries it has been the driving force of the trends. Tourists from around the world go to Europe in order to marvel at urban buildings, churches, mansions, parks, castles, and to enjoy the special atmosphere that they provide. And Europe has engaged in certain efforts to preserve all these values. Already 4 decades have passed since in 1975 Europe actually marked the beginning of appreciating the architectural values. And the year of European architecture, in a way, was a blast which allowed us to gain a better understanding of the need to protect the architectural heritage. It was understood that, of course, due to industrial development, we have lost a lot of values. Cities started to lose their individual traits, and the new developments quite often destroyed the cultural development. And the modern architecture, of course, disrupted the traditional layouts. And of course, these developments have quite significantly influenced the philosophy of architecture and also cultural heritage. The European Council, together with other international institutions, based on democratic principles, created a professional cooperation platform, which has served also as a basis for several international conventions, a list of recommendations, as well as exchanges of high-level experts between the member states. And it has set the tone for preserving heritage. And it reached its peak in 2005 when the Faro Convention on the societal value of cultural heritage was adopted. However, it's just one side of the coin. Of course, we also have the rather harsh reality. Sometimes we tend to forget the teachings of the past, and current building industry has for years dictating the rules of the game when it comes to the urban environment. Therefore, the environment is changing quite rapidly. Our landscape changes rapidly. We disrupt the past and create new building blocks. And along with quite successful modern architectural solutions, unfortunately, we also have a lot of negative examples. And the built heritage, unfortunately, is threatened by the building industry itself. And unfortunately, the historic build-up areas are somehow dominated by the modern influences, thus suffocating the historical masterpieces. As we travel across Europe, and as we look at not just the most beautiful sites, we can see vast differences in the built-up areas. Of course, there are many masterpieces of historical buildings, but unfortunately, quite often they are overshadowed by modern and rather neglectful architectural solutions. And here we are no longer actually talking about architecture. On the contrary, they seem to be repulsive. Sometimes it seems like there is a competition who can build the ugliest building. And of course, it no longer allows always to enjoy the historic heritage. Of course, also the EU structural funds that provide financing for new building projects not always ensure high-quality architecture, because the newly built buildings quite often are soulless. And if we look at the building industry, we can see that in certain places it is the industry itself who dictates how and where to build new buildings, and politicians act as instruments in the hands of these building companies in order to push forward such projects. And in a way, I could say that we are building a new catastrophe for the future. And unfortunately, there is no strong or significant counterweight to these trends. We could say that, you know, it's all right. Our space around us always experiences changes. Nothing lasts forever. We have to be more pragmatic. And what doesn't fit our needs at some point will be demolished, of course. So this seems to be the new reality in which we live. However, this philosophy and approach lowers the quality of life, also spreads indifference, and while destroying the cultural space of Europe that has been developed for centuries. If we look at the cultural heritage sector and its interaction with other sectors, we may conclude it has developed to a sector that also requires a very strict legal definitions, which means it is put into a rather narrow professional standard. However, at the same time, it also evolves into an interdisciplinary phenomenon. And in the sector of cultural heritage, both in national and also international scale, time has come for new changes. I would say that it even needs a restart. It doesn't mean that the previous systems have been very bad. Of course, they served the needs of certain time and certain circumstances. Of course, our societies go through vast changes, and we must keep up with all these changes and not to lag behind, because they may influence the quality and extent to which we may protect our cultural heritage. And for the protection of cultural heritage, we may need a new approach. We have to have a wider involvement of society. We probably also need to redistribute our responsibilities and put new emphasis. The state functions also have to adjust accordingly. We have to use the modern technologies and to address broader audience. This can be done through personal experiences, feelings, and attitudes, which is in contrast with standardized approach. Therefore, we should rather focus on rather personal approach to these issues. I think that the system has to be the driving force behind such changes, because quite often we are lost in the red tape or bureaucracy. We work with documents, databases, or software. However, sometimes this overshadows the substance, the monuments that we are trying to preserve. Of course, there are no perfect solutions. No one on this planet knows the right answers. However, we may assume that the most optimal solution is based on diversity, in inclusion, in an ethical, professional, tolerant approach centered on a human being and the quality of life in the broader sense of this term. It is clear that the system undergoes changes which will continue also in the future. The very essence of the cultural heritage is being expanded, and of course it also penetrates our daily lives, and also the society is more eager to participate. The heritage policy, of course, is never static. It always follows the changes in the society. And in heritage policy, we try to work with the best theories. However, we must also employ rather simplified and more understandable approaches as well. Of course, the heritage protection system not only depends on their structure and enthusiasm. In all countries, the system is hugely influenced by politicians. However, in many cases, the preserving of heritage is rather neglected due to certain reasons. Unfortunately, not all political powers have always served the interests of the society. But this, of course, has to change, because if we want to have a good heritage protection system in place, we have to balance these interests with the economic interests, because otherwise we'll continue to allow for low-quality architectural solutions in our space around us, while disregarding the cultural heritage. The heritage protection must be increasingly based on the overall ethical principles, with the quality of human life at the center. And therefore, we have to have a sustainable and long-term approach which may answer to the questions that will be topical in the future. Therefore, already today, we must do what will serve the interest of the next generations. Of course, it all should be based on our experience and knowledge, because we have to have a rather interdisciplinary approach to the cultural heritage and its protection, which provides us with a much broader view rather than viewing it in a very narrow and specific manner. Of course, it all should be based on long-term research that has been carried out, and while also considering the changes in the value systems within the society. And in the future, not only we should focus on several specific items or objects, but rather the overall larger picture. Probably we shouldn't bother ourselves with changes that are dictated by the needs to ensure quality of life, but rather we should be afraid of standardization, because for each place we still may find a different solution. Of course, the requirements for the preservation of each cultural site must be tailor-made whenever it is possible. Of course, we have to change the way we protect cultural heritage based on consultations, exchange of experiences, availability of information, and wider participation of society. We must promote an understanding that, first of all, we start to preserve our personal cultural heritage within our family, within our homes, so that everyone may become someone who restores and protects their own heritage. This is how we may strengthen our ties with our past and breathing new life into historic items. Only then we may expand our understanding to national and global approach. Of course, whenever we talk about artifacts and our items of heritage, we establish a contact with our past. And these items are carriers of information, which gives us very special feelings. We cannot just paint over all these values. They have to be highlighted as great values. And we should not replace historic items with synthetic materials, but rather seek more appropriate approaches, because we do not need illusions which have no soul instead of our cultural heritage. What we do not And of course, what we do not notice today, we still have the duty to preserve for the future generations. And in the future, of course, the preservation of cultural heritage will develop into two directions. One will be focused on wider society, to educating people and raise their awareness, while the second direction, rather smaller dimension, will remain the domain of professionals based on science, modern technologies, experience, and specialized expertise and skills. However, we have to ensure that both of these two levels interact rather than compete or overlap. Of course, the status of national historical or cultural monument is a manifestation of societal value, but at the same time, it comes with certain burdens which dictate that we must preserve them for the future. Of course, there will always be a conflict between our daily life and how it coexists with our need to make sure that also future generations may enjoy the heritage. Of course, the discussions will go on how old something has to be in order to qualify to be regarded as cultural monument. It's a paradox that in Europe it seems that rather relatively new heritage is the most threatened. Many architectural masterpieces of the late last century have been already destroyed or modified. Of course, the preservation of cultural heritage is something closely linked with the quality of human life, which only can be developed with a dialogue and wide consultations with general population. If we look back at the architecture's history, we can see that sometimes across the world, certain masterpieces and symbolic places have been created through destroying the previous cultural layers. Of course, the bureaucratic approach to protecting monuments sometimes would preclude us for even creating such new values. Of course, there are certain specific cases where due to the or in the name of development we have to make certain concessions in order to create even better values. Of course, we have to strike a healthy balance between the centuries-old artifacts and also modern architecture and design that may even complement each other. And here we are talking about a dialogue where the specialists of cultural heritage sometimes urge to actually supplement the cultural environment with new solutions. However, there are also cases where architects and designers sometimes simply say that, you know, there's nothing we can do, there is nothing we can improve upon the existing building or site. Therefore, architects must be experts in creating dialogue with the past and must be very careful where architecture has already filled in the space. Of course, laws cannot be written for each and every case. Therefore, in our sector, we must be professional, we must be active and development-oriented, and experts must work closely with state officials in order to apply the legal acts in the best possible manner, because in each case it's not about the formal approach but rather the proportionality and sense. Of course, therefore, public administration must be more creative. Of course, laws are never perfect and never harmonized. Of course, the changes are quite quick nowadays. However, not always all these changes have to be put into a narrow frame of legislative acts, because certain room must be left for creativity. Of course, none of the law can compete with clear consciousness. We must put emphasis on excellence. For example, in the Soviet regime in Latvia destroyed free and extinguished personalities simply because they had the potential to mobilize the society. Of course, Latvia is a small country. We have limited human resources. Therefore, we must use them effectively. We have to protect our talent and create environment where the talent may be developed further. Of course, the knowledge and skills play a crucial role. However, they must go hand in hand with also enthusiasm and the willingness to do the right thing. It is high time to include in the political agenda not only about iconical tourism spots, but also about our daily heritage, about the culture of the building industry, about the quality of architecture, about the love with which we supplement the values created by the previous generations, and also about our attitude towards the new building developments. Of course, the cultural layers can be found everywhere. The question is whether we are willing to see it. Architecture at all levels must be perceived as our responsibility towards the future, as an art to create high-quality living space. Cultural heritage is not something that we own. We only hold it for a while. Likewise, we do not own the time. Time is a gift and the greatest value that we are gifted. With time, everything changes around us, and also we ourselves change. Nothing remains the same. We can learn from the past, but of course, we cannot only moan about the past, because we cannot get stuck in the past. Therefore, sometimes we get stuck and live in the past. However, development is in the very core of human experience, and which also dictates a responsible and smart movement towards the future. And Europe, with its system of values, will remain, even if, in spite of different barriers, if it remains based on the creativity, culture, and cultural heritage. Thank you for your attention.
And distinguished guests and colleagues, I would like to give floor to the next speaker. And most probably, due to the reasons that I know Mr. José María Ballester for very many years, and also at the moment when we became independent country, we joined different international institutions. Council of Europe was that institution which was most open to assistance, dialogue, advice. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. José María Ballester was here in Latvia for the first time in 1994. And he has been here quite regularly, has seen different events, has seen processes, has participated in different events, even when we had different economic pressure, when we had to decide what to give preference, which processes to implement. And we have also seen rather aggressive development. We have talked about aggressive attitude to cultural heritage. We have always had advice, and therefore the floor is yours, Mr. José María Ballester. The floor is yours, so we are open to you now. I expect that you have lots to say and tell us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juris, for your words of presentation. Dear friends, because most of you are dear friends for a long time. I'm most grateful for the to the Cultural Heritage Board of Latvia for its invitation to take part in this international congress. It's a congress of celebrations. I think it's very good to celebrate, because celebrate means to stop, to look to the past, but to look above all to the future. To look to the future. I would like also to thank Mr. Juris' team, because, including Mr. Resniak, because we have been cooperating very closely in the past, and always very well. And I would like to add my greetings also to the representative of Estonia and Lithuania, countries of warm memories also for me. Today, Latvia, our host country today, is a country which always feels so close, as is one of the Europe's references in matters of cultural heritage. I think the speech of Mr. Juris Dambis was a very interesting speech, making the point and thinking how to evolve and show us a possible address for a possible direction for the future. Being here in Latvia, I started in '94, coming to this country, as Juris mentioned. I have also to thank and to have a souvenir for the country's authorities, from President Ulmanis, the first President of the Republic here, and his successors, and the different ministers of culture with whom it was my honor to collaborate, because all of them have been very good collaborators. And indeed, to so many actors in public life here in Latvia, I keep in mind the first visit to Ababa Valley, for example, one of the first projects we developed here, and a group of them became forever the true friends. But I'm going to come to our topic today. Most of you know that my desk in Strasbourg was at the same time conservatory, observatory, and laboratory of European cultural and natural heritage policies. It was, all my term during the Council of Europe was a time of change. The evolution of the concept of cultural heritage, the new international treaties, and Granada for architectural heritage, Malta, Valletta for archaeological heritage, Florence for landscape, for European landscape, and I have no time for the Faro Convention, but in a certain way I could work of the preparatory works of this convention. It was a time in which I have understood. Now I'm celebrating 51 years working for cultural heritage. And then at this time I understood the importance of cultural heritage in the model of society. I think in the past we have been working a lot, all these things, evolution of cultural heritage policies, attention to different heritage, didn't exist before, and now they are already adopted for European countries. But I think our mistake was to stay in the framework of culture. All of these changes took part in a cultural framework, and it was difficult, and I could understand that. And in fact, as I mentioned, cultural heritage is not only a cultural problem, a cultural question, a cultural item. It's a question concerning directly our model of society. When we speak about the model of society, in the same, sometimes in a more personal conversation, I said the European way of life, but the European way of life is the role of cultural heritage in our life. This is our true European way of life. And we can see it nowadays. We are living a time of social mutation, evolving at a speed never before experienced by humanity. We are living a globalization, an increasing globalization, and not only economical. When I was at the Council of Europe, our authorities always were very attentive. When you speak about the globalization, you have to point that it's economic globalization, but it was clear that the globalization is general, include all aspects of the actual life. It became a generalized phenomenon. We see that frontiers gradually fade. The revolution of information technologies, I would like to recall that is the only time that the humanity is living a revolution in real time. We have had revolutions before, but the revolution took 40, 50, 60 years in order to become effective at European level. But now we are living a revolution in real time, and the revolution appears to have no end. And that this implies a change, enormous change in behaviors, because of the rapidity of what we call nowadays the social networks, the information networks. These changes concern also relationships between persons, between peoples, and between those responsible for the economy and finances. We see the crises are not more national crisis or regional crisis in our continent or in different continents, but now there are world crises. We are seeing how the epicenter of the relationships, for not saying the leadership, is ceasing to belong to the West and is being displaced to another continent. Nothing against. We speak every day and we hear about new economic, new economies, new emerging economies, India, China, etc. Nothing against, but we have to think also to the model of society that these economic changes, this economic change of leadership, of influence, could have on our model of society, because they have an absolutely different model of society. We have the generalized migratory phenomena. Now we all feel citizens of the world, of course, but this phenomena leads to the emergence of new identities in our own social body. We are not prepared for that. You can read the everyday papers and conflicts because we are not prepared. We have never worked and we are not prepared this new situation. Even the idea of Europe is being questioned. Just when it will be, the Union seems most solid. Nowadays, the question of Europe can be seen everywhere. Everywhere, some countries more strongly, other countries in a more soft way, but there is a question of Europe, in Europe in which we believed and we continue to believe. Very often I have reflected the same question. For you, what means, what is Europe? And I have always given the same answer with response to my personal convictions, of course. Europe is a form of democratic citizenship based on those values of a spiritual, ethical, intellectual order forged over the centuries of our continent's development. Values that have been and are determining factors of our mentality and our own model of society. This model that now we have to adapt to the new circumstances of the social mutation in which we are immersed. This was remembered, and we must not forget it, by the head of state and government during the summit meeting organized by the Council of Europe in Vienna in '93. The first paragraph of its final declaration proclaimed that we can only create a big space of democratic security in a Europe that was recovering at this time its geographical unity on the basis of these values: parliamentarian democracy, the rule of law, the rule of law, the universality and indivisibility of human rights, and the awareness of a common cultural heritage enriched by its diversity. And it's very significant, in my opinion, that was at this right moment when Europe was becoming really a big continent, recuperating the political and the cultural and geographical union, when the head of state pointed out the cultural heritage as a pillar of for building the new Europe, together with human rights, with the rule of law. And this signifies that the cultural heritage, its management and policies, can never be sectorial, as I said at the beginning, because they constitute one of the pillars of our society, and by definition, they must be transversal. I think this mistake I spoke at the very beginning is one of the points that we have to face nowadays, to have transversal policies of cultural heritage. You know, I don't want to refer to the European Commission nowadays at all, but already in the past, when the former Secretary General of the Council of Europe became commissioner, vice president of the commission, and commissioner, being a very close friend, we had a meeting in order to organize the program of the commission. What can do the commission in the field of cultural heritage? And I remember my position was nothing. Nothing, because if we read the text organized in the European Commission, it is said that the Commission will keep the cultural line, the cultural aspects in all the fields in which the Commission should be active. From the very beginning, this idea of transversal is there, but the problem is that when they mean, like at the Council of Europe, cultural heritage, they mean to be sectorial. And what is sectorial are the technical aspects, conservation, preservation. Of course, this is sectorial, but the policies should be transversal. I think it's one of the most important points you have to face nowadays. By good fortune, the concept of cultural heritage has evolved a great deal over recent years, and we are well equipped. The Council of Europe, since the European Year of Architectural Heritage in 1975, linked the survival of the cultural heritage to town and territorial plan. It was a first action. The European Landscape Convention, the only international treaty specifically regulating landscape management, adopted in Florence in the year 2000, marks the closure of this circle of evolution, conferring a heritage dimension to the territory itself, including, as it does not only landscape, but also natural, cultural, archaeological, and social values and resources. But I think nowadays the true heritage, the common heritage, is the territory, with all these values, resources that are included and are part of the territory. It is in this context that we have to develop the policies and actions to make of the cultural heritage a key element of our model of society. This implies valuing very one of the new categories of heritage. In reality, they are not new because they were always here, but now they are accepted, identified, and but we have to make them intelligible again. Many times we have the question, what intelligibility has the heritage for new generations? How are they to understand what means this cultural heritage? How are they to know what values are at the origin of these elements of our common heritage? And we have to give them their place in social life, their true meaning. This meaning cannot be other than to translate in a material or immaterial key the foundational values of the Council, foundational values of Europe, to which I have already referred. You know, when I was at the Council of Europe, we had the founder values. And the founder values were always at the origin of all our actions. Then these values remain and are there, and we have to reinforce them mainly for among the new generations. And we have to make this heritage and these values accessible to the citizens in the diversity, of course, in the diversity displayed by globalized society. It's something very important at the present time, but we have not only to make accessible and understandable, we have to understand our values and our cultural heritage elements, but at the same time we are called to accept the other. We are called to show to the other the path of what we call now European construction. We have to share the heritage. One of my questions is how can we share our heritage with other people, or with people coming from other systems, cultural, religions, etc., if we are cancelling all matters related to cultural heritage in the training periods at the school, at the university. How to explain? I know better nowadays the case of Spain, but I think it's not the only case in Europe who's studying history of art, history of religions. We are going to a very technical training, what is very good, but at the same time we are forgetting all these matters that prepare each person to understand himself and to understand the other, and of course to be close of the expression of material of these values that I said is a cultural heritage. We have to recall and to increase the social cohesion that the cultural heritage has always generated. Recall, for example, the urbanity claim by François Choët, speaking about the historical centers. Urbanity not only in the sense of politesse or good education is already very much, but urbanity is the art of living all together in a complex, in a town, in a historical center. We have to recall also the ability of cultural heritage to promote social harmony and understanding, a sense of belonging and emotional community. It is not the only vector to achieve a true European citizenship, but it is an indispensable factor. The Faro Convention shows us the path. In truth, each element of the heritage and its landscape tell us a story, a way of living, and also a way of believing, a way of living together. All these stories taken together, merged into a single dynamic, mark the path towards the birth of that model of society so urgently demanded today. And we have to be able to be able to understand that one thing is the conservation, the preservation, all the technical heritage, and we need them. The evolution has been very important for that. And a different question is the role of cultural heritage, or played by cultural heritage in the model of society, concerning all the aspects of life. We shall only find it if we are capable of understanding that, understanding what we have been, what we are, and what we want to be in the future as Europeans and also as citizens of the world, because we have the task and the defeat, as we said in French. We have the task of showing to new generation this model of society that have been for many centuries the European way of life. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ja man vajadzētu raksturot nākamo runātāju.
If I had to introduce the next speaker, Cristina Gorties Cortines, then I should probably refer to something that I observed some 5 years ago in an international conference in Europe. If Cristina isn't there, the event doesn't make sense. So, in a way, if she's here, this means that this event really makes sense. Maybe Cristina no longer remembers this, but when she first came to Latvia as a member of European Parliament, professor and scientist in the field of cultural heritage, she was, in a way, a driving force. She was very active to participate in all the events, and she was really enthusiastic and energetic. And she always tried to improve whatever she comes across. So all this time when she was in Latvia, the government at that time said that, you know, we have to cut down the financing for the culture. Some consolidation should be done. And Cristina actually met the head of the government and lectured him on what is cultural heritage, what is the responsibility of the government in preserving the cultural heritage throughout Europe. And this brave interaction and her ability to understand the situation where real action is needed, this is somehow that really characterizes Cristina, which we really value. So I give floor to you.
Because I don't know if someone is working. Thank you very much to all the people for coming. And I'm very happy being here. I would express my gratitude to have been invited to this meeting, but it's not normal to find this kind of meetings. An institutional interest is in here in heritage and its future. I also want to thank Joris Dambis, my friend, who is an expert. He is wise and an expert, well versed in the history of heritage policy, who has participated with the Council of Europe in the process of recovering real heritage. Here is Sir Ballester, that I told him this morning I don't want to speak very much of the Council of Europe because I am going to cry of nostalgia. and we need to look at the future. Among all the seminars organized as part of the European Year of Cultural Heritage, the present one has an outstanding professional approach, and it is oriented to the debate of solutions and the distribution of responsibility. I like this, because as I'm going to say, we have too many events without results. I have often commented that politician authorities and the European institutions tend to emphasize the wonders of heritage, talking about these successes and good practices. However, they rarely explain the difficulties that need to be overcome in order to achieve good results. We need to know the difficulties, because to copy the good practices without knowing how they have suffering is quite impossible to repeat. Too much optimism, enthusiasm, and less facts. If we make the effort to get closer to the ground, we find that the protection of conservation of cultural heritage and historic centers is a complicated issue, very complicated. The conservation of cities is a source of conflicts and tensions between supporters of the long-term vision and the specific interests of individuals or power groups, demonstrating that those in favor of destruction are usually better organized and have better resources than those who are in charge of policy making. Maintaining a built-up landscape and its surroundings requires strong policies and administrations, convinced of their objectives. And in many countries we haven't. It also requires a great deal of coordination plus technical and human resources, which are not always available. Now I'm going to have a little overview of what has been done. We must also recognize great achievements, not only because we are happy with them, but also not to repeat the efforts in the same issue. In the last few decades, in terms of heritage protection, we had good results, although it is true that there is still much to be done. In the last 50 years, the world has been convinced of the importance of historical heritage and the need of its conservation. Management tools have been created. Management tools is very important in politics. They have carried out an important task. A large part of the heritage has been identified. We have a lot of catalogued and defined. Criteria have been formulated for its protection. In addition, the network of international organizations has been consolidated, with a doctrine and practices accepted by all, such as UNESCO, the Council of Europe, Valletta instructions, for instance, ICRON and others, which are present all over the globe. And here, in this moment, I want to declare my admiration for the great work done by Europa Nostra, their success and active presences all over Europe. Among these excellent results, the research and programs undertaken since 2000 by some institutions should be highlighted, including the World Bank, that now is working for heritage, in order to demonstrate the positive impact of conservation practices on the social and economic system. We have a lot of research about this. And at the same time, it is worth noting the enormous effort made during the European Year of Cultural Heritage to raise awareness in society about the value of heritage as an asset that enriches regions as the basis of tourism and which in turn contributes to strengthen the collective identity. These are results, not everywhere, but we have already the ideas, the methodology, the basis to work. A change of mentality has been achieved, that's important. And the love for heritage, once reduced to elites, is now shared by millions of people. One could speak of heritage democratization, which favors its defense and its evaluation as base of cultural memory and economic source for the peoples that inherited such or well-renowned works. That's a little bit the idea of Faro. I don't like Faro at all, but it has some good sides. I believe, however, that the EU and international organizations, as well as state and associations, when celebrating the European Year of Cultural Heritage, have focused on declarations and manifestos, besides awakening conscience, and once again prioritized the objectives of empowering awareness and participation. So they have worked nearly all about empowering awareness and participation. Leaving behind, that's the theme of my conference, leaving behind other great challenges which heritage faces. In other words, the daily problems arising in regions, municipalities, and neighborhoods when defending large works or light little spots and signboards had not been treated. Moreover, they have addressed the conservation of heritage without taking into account stakeholders, as the building owners, building enterprises, and restoration companies. I will get back to this matter later. Too many activities, but still we need to go to the deep problems. We must be critical and recognize that it is not enough to be conscious of the problems, as it is necessary to identify and analyze their causes, trying to see what their origin is and how to remedy them. There are phenomena whose dimension exceeds the possibilities of immediate actions, but it will always be useful to approach and examine and look at them objectively. Today, I'm just going to list some of and try to propose how to approach them. Challenges in Europe, that's me. As I do not know the situation of all the states, I will not talk about specific ones, but focus on Europe and what I have seen during my teaching experience, besides my research and professional work, especially my expertise in the Parliament European and now as a consultant, because in the Parliament I have been 15 years and I had the opportunity to see what happened in Europe, because Europe is a labyrinth, really. From my point of view, the future of European heritage is in a critical situation. There are major structural problems that will only be solved in the very long term. We require a great cultural effort and complex actions. Firstly, I will mention the depopulation, with the consequent abandonment of buildings, towns and landscapes that are not being taken care of. Usually, in the Marcel team master that I organized, when I was working, Mr. Ballester, we have a motto. There is not garden without a gardener, and there is not a house without an owner. The landscape has not owners in this time. Nobody cares about them. Phenomenon on which we must add the aging of the population and the presence of new owners who are unaware of the value and raison d'etre of the heritage. And that's when I believe that one of the most things that I think it is quite stupid to speak about gentrification. If in a city, the city is void and arrive the immigrants from Morocco there, why is gentrification is another people from the country come back again to the center of the city? There are no refugees, the citizens from France that go to live in Bordeaux. They have the proper right to be there. And what are many people who come from other countries and other culture, they don't understand the heritage, they have not the culture to look at them. So we need to integrate them in our issues. But not to say that if we go there, we are invading some city. Gentrification is a very dangerous concept for heritage. But it's a fashion. We are very clever and very modern. We are against gentrification. The second threat is the destruction of the extensive and magnificent religious heritage that in many places does not have worshippers and devotees to keep it. A situation that has as background the strong secularization of society and the lack of understanding of the importance of religion that religion has in the past. I know that future religious heritage recent association is working very well, but it's not sufficient. In this issue, I'm working. They have a good meeting the 10th of October in Paris, but we need to change our mind for me, how we look to religions to make understand the citizens that religion is part of our culture. I know many hotels in many places, like remember in this moment one in Maastricht is in the church. Do know the people who go to the hotel that down there is a cemetery? Do they know? that the cemetery is down, close to the wine and the caves. So we need to make understand people how important religion was. It was part of our culture with music and that thing, but this is not the theme of my conference. I'm going to examine these topics because we will need separate sessions and a multidisciplinary approach. The third problem that I'm going to work in is the lack of common European cultural policy regarding heritage. We should recall that both the Council of Europe and the European Commission have not authority to propose specific policy or legislation on cultural heritage. The founding statutes in the Treaty of the EU competencies depend on the states. Everybody knows in this room. However, just as the Council of Europe once knew how to cross this border and looked for a cooperation formula that was beneficial and accepted by the states, the EU Commission has not found a model in which to fit culture into its framework. Nothing at all. Nothing. Zero. They don't understand what is going on. When we speak, and when it has done so, it has been limited to support the statement in this favor, give prices or subsidies, without clear criteria or a coherent program. Structural funds, for instance, that's what they do. They give money, but they don't have a follow-up about what is happening with this money. And many times we have destroyed a lot with structural funds. In any case, it has been limited to aid through the regional policy, which is decided by the countries and the states. It also supports concrete actions through an intermediary such as Europa Nostra Awards and something like that. But we don't have a European policy for cultural heritage. And in many cases, the European legislation is against heritage. During my 15 years in the Parliament, we had more than 15 interventions, more than 15, against measures done by Europe that were against heritage. They forbid many things. Well, furthermore, one of the areas that neither has the EU legislative power or capability to intervene is in the urban subject. That is a big tragedy. A key issue for the good conservation of historic centres and the promotion of urban development measures and a model of action. So urban instruments are the best instrument to keep heritage in place. But Europe has nothing to do with it, and they don't want to have it, nothing to do. And now we're in, with the Brexit, Europe, the new black and white book of Europe is let us, the countries, intervene more and reduce legislation. Something absolutely necessary in municipalities and countries without an efficient regulatory framework and limited management capacity. In many cities we have not managing capacity. It could be interesting to have some urban instructions, even if they are not binding. Only then the ground pressure or initiatives which negatively impacts our heritage could be restrained. This limitation prevents the proposal from the EU of mandatory guidelines that could be applied throughout Europe, as is the case with the environment. I have been 15 years in the Environment Committee and in the Industry and Research Committees. Also, as I have always been envious of European-wide programs. I like environment policy that we can go all over Europe. But my position is that we could do the same with culture, but we are afraid of doing it. Another problem caused by the lack of competences is that the administration and politicians who manage them are afraid and hesitate when they are asked to decide on culture and urbanism issues. Fear that provokes the cause, fears that provoke the rejection of challenges and generate constant black holes in policy, which cause the application of incoherent programs. When you go to a politician or to the commission and say, why will we do this? We have no capacity, and they are afraid, and they don't know how to do. But we could do, but not binding. I'm convinced that, and I can demonstrate even without competences, if there are political will and good and practical proposal, Europe had created programs accepted by all the countries that had changed mentalities and introduced new practices. It is the case of women's rights. Women's rights is not in the treaty, but Europe had made a lot of legislation for the elections to ask the new countries, for instance, in Kosovo, many countries, to have the women in the lists. They have made a lot of policies, but are not binding. So that's what I want, to bring them the opportunity, to convince them to do things, even recommendations, even if they are not binding. Because the people need guidelines, the society needs guidelines, need to share the same culture. Therefore, as I will indicate later, my first proposal is to draft similar to Agenda 21. The Agenda 21 environment is only instructions dedicated to the urban topic, historic center, landscape and heritage. I asked many, and it's in the documents in the Parliament, I asked to make an Agenda 21 of heritage that includes architecture and conservation. As Agenda 21 applied to environment, which was not binding. Agenda 21 was not binding. And yet it has been an essential guide in Europe and all over the world in how to correctly apply different directives as air, water, waste. So even in India, they speak us about the Agenda 21 because there are 10 commands, little documents, they don't need a lot, that are applied in South America everywhere because it's a good policy. Good instructions, very clear, an instrument for the governance that they don't know how to do things and they have guides. My opinion, we could work with the guides that have been the Council of Europe, a new document, a review of what they have done, a resume just to send everywhere, accepted by Europe as a no-bind, only our recommendation. This could have been a good result for the year of heritage. Another problem, a consequence of the lack of knowledge of the European institutions on this issue is that in all policies and programs related to heritage, the authentic stakeholders related to its protection have been left out. When Europe speaks about stakeholders of heritage, who are going there? The associations, NGO. But where, for example, companies dedicated to restoration or building owners do not appear or have been summoned to any meeting or consultation where heritage issues are decided. That's very common in Europe. In Europe, it's like a mother that has only a list of 8 children. If there is 16, they don't know it. For instance, in environment, when we decide about water, we don't ask to come to the municipalities. When it's the municipalities who need to change the policy and to need to pay the depuration of the water. But the NGO are not there. It's WildLife or the big ecological associations. But WildLife is not going to pay and I'm not going to be the responsible of introducing the new directive of water. Why the municipalities are not there? Who need to make all the technology to convince the people and to pay for them? So it's a case of cultural heritage. There's associations in the states, representatives, but nor are the owners of the buildings. The companies that made the restoration are not there. You know, our brother are the industry. The companies that restore heritage, we need to work hand with them because they want the restoration, because they live for the restoration. If a building is destroyed, the company has not worked. The companies that work for restoration, they need the buildings and the art and everything living, but never had been asked to go. Finally, I want to address one of the main challenges is the scarcity of human resources. One of our problems is the scarcity of human resources. Professionals training in cultural heritage, university graduates, experts with experience in and above all the professionals, what we say arts and crafts. In many countries, the old skills are already lost and have not a clear criteria for urban planning in historic cities. For instance, in France, we have only 2 companies that make la dorure. Dorure is, in English, I don't know how you say that, dorure. Le doré, For the enterprise, something like that. I suppose that somebody knows en français dorure, el dorado, el patinado de dorado. No companies. Well, in many things we have not companies. Skills are lost. In fact, there has never been a solution to some of major problems such as the loss of knowledge, the lack of apprentices, and the decline of workshops where the profession were taught. As in the case in France, as well as in other countries, it's customary that architects and enterprise working in heritage restoration are required to have some skills and knowledge and know how to able to engage in activities of this kind. Therefore, without the guarantee of them knowing the criteria as well as the necessary techniques to approach and resolve correctly the restoration and that is contracted, they might be disqualified to join or lead any such activities. In the newspaper, we have from time to time some paintings, some buildings that have been destroyed by the restorers. Why? Because we have not a lot of people who do it. In many countries like France, they look after, they forbid the people to touch some works, but in many countries, not at all. My impression in the last 3 years, during my collaboration with AERPA, the European Association for Restoration of Heritage Architecture, confirms that the departments of the European Commission have difficulty understanding the logic or the conditions and needs of the restoration heritage industry. The problems of the restoration industry or companies have never been in the European agenda, and needs and requirements have not been addressed. Cultural heritage has been surrounded by the great silences. I'm going to tell you an example. As a consultant in the Art Civilis Foundation that I work now, I went to the DG industry 3 years ago. In Europe, they are creating a lot of clusters of group of industries of different kinds. There's the cluster of the many things, of the companies that work in many things, in petrol, in other things. And there is a construction platform, 2 construction platforms, one in the DG research and another in the industry. And they are very happy with the clusters. And the commissioners was going to every day speaking that they want to create clusters. So I went to the DG and I spoke with the director and I said, we want to create a cluster of companies that the issue is to restore heritage. Restorators and companies. Do you know what told me? You are very little, you are very few. And I have not the possibility to, in all the countries we say, we work trying that they join in an association that it exists. And we go with 300 companies. But at the moment, the companies that I knew were only 60, 80. They're few. So what happens? That all the cluster of construction is in the hands of the big companies, that they pay and they do everything. They have people that are living in Brussels working and they decide everything. The big companies of construction, they control those. And when we go with the heritage, they say that we're very few. That's the problem. There is in the training of specialized professionals and apprentices in the restoration of heritage is another of the forgotten themes. But in this case, I would say that many states have also avoided confronting this problem. One example of this oblivion in the European context is the exclusion of the arts and crafts specialized in heritage in the program that is every day in the media, organized by the General Directorate of Employment, European Apprenticeship Week. In the European Apprentice Week, that is now in November, where many countries are there inside, I went there and I asked, and I sent an exhibition that we had made in the Parliament last year about the apprentice and the need of new apprentice. Beautiful exhibition, beautiful. Well, and they told me, no, heritage apprentices are not included. No, they are apprentices about digital, apprentices about that. So companies have organized something that are excluded. When apprentice is a word that comes up from the handmade work, but are out. And the same happened with Erasmus. And now I go to the positive word. What can we do? What can we do? Europe can do many things, more than we can imagine. Keep in mind that The cultural heritage and its conservation are transversal, as you said, and Ballester said now. That is affected by many of the sectoral policies exerted by the European Commission. I'm going to mention three. The environment policy has approved and implementing many legislative texts that directly affect heritage. Why they don't see about the impact in heritage? Among others, the environment impact one, which in the third, the environmental impact directive. In the Article 3, I was working in it and I introduced the amendment, includes the conservation of cultural resources throughout the Europe areas. Well, in the subsequent revisions, there are still not indicated how to address the environmental impact on historical heritage. My proposal, and our proposal that was voted in the Parliament, was to ask them to write a recommendation how to apply impact assessment in cultural heritage. Because also, after the directive of impact assessment, they had been written some years ago a document that are the instructions for the civil servants that are working with impact assessment. They say if for the application of habitat there is some instructions, why don't have some instructions on how to apply the impact assessment directive in heritage? I know that some countries do, like Poland. Poland has in Cracovia systems, they are quite good. But we need a European document, very simple, how to apply cultural heritage impact assessment. Europe declares that heritage should be protected, but does not clarify how. A group of trees cannot be destroyed, but the cathedral of medieval monastery, yes. Another legislation is the use of chemicals, the RIS. The RIS, I work also in RIS, is one of the worst documents in Europe. It's horrible. Well, in the use of chemicals has created many problems for the restoration, since some of the products needed for the job had been banned, like lead, and we need lead for the windows. We need a lot of materials. This, for instance, one of the problems that we had with the energy efficiency for buildings. In the 2004, I succeeded introducing an amendment saying the heritage should be out of the directive, that we could organize another system for heritage, for the adaptation of the heritage. And I won. But 2011 I lost because one member of the political group of the Greens, they didn't want it because they thought that we want to do what we wanted. So what happens that they delete the amendment, and now there is not a clear guide for how to implement the directive of energy efficiency. They are covering all the buildings with plastic, a horrible solution that they are doing in many countries, but we should need a specific document, guidelines for how to respect it. For instance, in Belgium they have a lot of problems with the windows, with the modernist windows, and it's really a problem that we need a specific treatment. However, there is another department that is very, very important for heritage, very important, and Judith Davis spoke about it, is the internal market. One of the pillars of European policy, which in some of its touted regulations is clearly harming the correct restoration of heritage. I refer to the standardization process that includes building regulations, construction rules such as structural materials, windows, and so on. We stop, for instance, because in the standardization system, behind is the great lobby of companies, because they want the standardization because they want to sell hands and hands of things. For instance, one of the big lobbies in standardization are the British. Now they are going out, but they were the kings of the construction rules and the kings of the internal market. And it was the windows. This company of Danish company, I believe, that makes windows they are very active, trying that everybody need to use the same windows. Where are we going in a castle with a window, a modern window? We stop this, but it is a menace. But now there is on the table one of the most dangerous things for me for heritage is the structures. If there is only some kind of structure that should be accepted in the use of construction, when a project goes to the administration, the civil servant needs to say no because it's not on the legislation. So many castles, many buildings that they have big and specific structure, they cannot be restored. So it's the most risky legislation for Europe. But another document that is for me horrible, and at the same time it could be changed easily, is the public, in the internal market, I need to highlight the Public Procurement Directive, which regulates the public procurement system for all the contracts. The responsible service of great restoration workers or companies say that one disadvantage of heritage is that in public context they are forced to shut down, that is, accept the cheapest offer, even if it means lower quality in the contracts. All architects, building master and administration know very well the damage this has caused to heritage itself, without forgetting the unfair competition that in many cases has been in the cause of bad restoration. In addition, this measure favors large companies, which then subcontract small specialized workshops and suffocate them with their prices. The experts in heritage in reality are little companies. So the big companies go to the tender, wins the tender with a low cost, and after they go to the little companies to build it. And they cannot live with this situation. There are many of them are closing. So it's really important to change, to make an exception for cultural heritage. In France, for instance, they have already. In some countries, they say, when they transfer the directive, they say, heritage is out. But in many countries, no, like in Spain. And you are forced to accept many contracts that after they fail, even because the companies, they don't control the technique that they should be using. In 2014, in the revision of the Public Procurement Directive, the Commission and Parliament approved an article where it was indicated that in the case of cultural heritage and environmental work, budgets could be approved if the company demonstrated its technical capacity. So we approved this amendment in the Parliament. Well, 2 months after, the Council of Ministers of the EU deleted cultural heritage and left environment. So in this moment, if you have a call and a tender for environment, the companies can say is not cheap, is higher the level of the price, but we are a company, expert company, we cannot do this with heritage. Who deleted it? The countries. Why the countries deleted it? Because the lobby of the big companies in construction is very strong. But I need to say something, I want to say transip. The countries that help more in the Council of Europe, so the Council of Ministers, heritage are the East countries. Latvia, Slovenia, the East countries, all the countries that come after the fall of the wall, they fight more for heritage than the old countries like Germany and France. I could treat other issues that affect cultural heritage which are negatively affected by European legislation, but I do not have time to expose them. The list is long. But what is my message? In some states, these problems have been solved, but others need the impetus and authority provided by the EU or international organizations. On the other hand, we have seen, unfortunately, that many times there have been setbacks, threats that appear on the horizon, therefore. We should never disregard the strength that ideas and commitments are carried when many states and Europe propose and recognize them. So if we have an idea that is written in Europe, many countries can be convinced, even if they are not binding. I repeat this idea hundreds of times. I believe that many of these issues have a solution that is at the reach of our hand. Many things are at the reach of our hands. If they have not been solved so far, it is because no one has defended them. They have not entered the agenda of the major associations dedicated to the defense of heritage or companies. Not have researchers and politicians considered them relevant. I would like to clarify, however, that these are not purely technical problems. The way to solve them is through politics. We must penetrate within the institutions, the legislative and executive, where things are decided and informed and convinced. One thing that many civil servants have the habit is to say, don't need to go because it's a technical meeting. Doesn't exist a technical meeting. technical meetings for very concrete things. In many forums, politicians should be invited and listen. Well, what they like is just to speak 5 minutes and to fly. That's true. How to do it? One requires different process, but I believe everyone will benefit if they were addressed at a national, international dimension. We need to get the international dimensions to recover the spirit of the Council of Europe. The creation of an apprentice program or an Erasmus regarding the profession of heritage suppose an enormous effort of fitting different models, but someday it will have to be put on the table. Other issues can be solved by creating an ecosystem multidisciplinary working group where the true stakeholders could be heard. That is what I propose, to write a heritage agenda with clear instructions and recommendations aimed to the responsible for heritage. Very short. Too many, we write too much. Very short. God was very clever, and he wrote only 10 commands. He wrote 10 commands. God, that could write everything that we could be. And we need to be clear. The Council of Europe in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s have done this, but now it is in a fragile state. If we propose a realistic and practical text, it will be supported by the EU, I'm sure. Currently, I'm preparing a report regarding, and for me this is very important, regarding the inclusion of the material historical heritage, in the circular economy, which will place us in the center of the environment policy. If someone wants to help to accompany me in the trip, I will be delighted, as I cannot do it by myself. This is for me a key point now, a key point of the policy. Heritage is circular economy. Why circular economy? Very simple. What is circular economy? Circular economy is recycling. What more clear recycling than heritage restoration? Even antiques, a chair that is going to die, if you go to the waste, we recover it and we use. A house that is going to destroy, we recover it and we use. This is recycling. And at the same time, if we get it, the heritage is going to avoid a lot of waste. And one of the first issues of the agenda of the environment, is avoiding waste. And heritage is avoiding waste. But no other thing we need to, we say this, no? We need to go inside the circular economy, because in this moment is a great fashion, and we need to be with the fashion and everything. I'm convinced that the time has come for the great experts and society to begin to elaborate the work that was previously done by some institutions that today are not able to perform. Will we take the light in the hands? The states are very weak, the regions are very weak, the European institutions are weak. We need to go ahead. Democracy needs participation, participation needs actions. That's what I believe we need to do. We don't need intermediaries, but if we want to convince the society and institutions, we must abandon humble and scientific arrogance and understand the logic of those we want to convince. It is time for action, and we can start working in that direction and get many targets. Thank you very much. Now comes a company. I'm very happy.
Paldies, Korinas kundze, jūs mūs iedvesmojāt.
Thank you very much for your inspirational speech. And of course, the preservation of cultural heritage is an act of cooperation and dialogue between all the stakeholders. And this is why we have also invited representatives of different sectors to participate in today's conference. And this is why now I will give floor to an entrepreneur who has devoted his work to cultural heritage and high-quality job performance, someone whose opinion we value very highly, Mr. Andris Kreislers. Thank you very much for your introduction. And what concerns the cheapest offers mentioned by the previous speaker, so probably I will skip it over. So, to introduce myself, I'm the founder and owner of a restoration company. And I actually sold my construction company 15 years ago, and currently I'm playing Monopoly, so to say. I'm buying land, I develop buildings, property, I organize different architect competitions in order to come up with the best possible results, and then I rent out or sell the result of my work. I would like to thank Pēteris Blūms, Zaiga Gaile, Dace, Čoldere, Liene Markova, who, when I graduated in late 1980s, actually introduced me to the restoration, and also the value of our cultural heritage. And following my studies in arts and architecture, I was quite knowledgeable about the role of details in architecture, but I was not so knowledgeable about heritage. And this is why I felt that it is my responsibility to learn more about these issues. And today I will be covering two topics to cover, so to say. First would be the power of spirituality in architectural, cooperation and core groups. And the second, which is probably more understandable, cultural heritage as a resource to attract new generations to the city center. I'm really happy for the opportunities that I have been given also today to share my opinions. In a way, I have been on a spiritual journey in my work. Initially, I lived my life intuitively, moving towards the future. Later on, I supplemented this path with spiritual growth. Of course, as an entrepreneur, I always have to stick and remember about the numbers. However, at the same time, I truly care about how the projects that we develop influence the city and its overall impression. And therefore, I put a strong emphasis on the future usability of the buildings that we develop. I have actually graduated also from Via Integralis program in Latvia and Switzerland, and probably due to this, although my business is only related to real estate and its development, actually I survived also the financial crisis. It was 20 years ago when, without any theoretical basis and experience, I intuitively looked for what the society would need in the future, and this is how I actually came to the Restoration Institute, where I met people who also had a very clear and sustainable vision of the future. And as I managed my construction company, of course, I also felt the pressure for the political structures, and this is why actually I sold my business, and thus I maintained the opportunity to work to maintain my dignity. Actually, together with the state and the municipality, we decided what would happen with the land that I bought in the old town. And it was decided that near the Peter's Church we should create one high-quality architectural building. Of course, we started the project, and then 15 years later, we actually were awarded the Building of the Year award. It seemed like everything is fine. It seemed like we achieved consensus between the cultural and historical space, as well as our ambitions, namely my ambitions. But why am I talking about this successful project? The problem is that sometimes I feel the lack of link or ties between me and the city. And talking about this particular spot, it seemed like it is quite fragmented. However, in our daily life, people tend to get used to what they see, and sometimes they don't even notice the lack of links between the past and the present. And these were actually the principles based on which I designed the building that I developed. But it seemed that I managed to actually link the past and present in a quite successful manner. But still, there is more room for improvement, and of course, my ambitions doesn't end at this one project. Of course, in this successful project, the outcome was quite good. However, I once read a finding that basically we cannot solve our problems if we are mentally exhausted. We all know how it is to play basketball with a flat ball. Of course, it's practically impossible, and also from the audience's point of view, this is no longer the basketball that we expect. However, all these challenges can be resolved if we are mentally in a good place. Let me emphasize the unique view of Otto Scharmer on current challenges. As I mentioned, many successful entrepreneurs have been quite intuitive in Latvia. And Otto Scharmer actually looks at tomorrow's problems through today's outlook. And he says that 5 people, if they belong to core group, may change the future. And this is how he came to this notion of core groups, namely a core group of 5 energetic people may succeed in implementing even very ambitious projects. And the school director, Imants Žūriņš, once said that there is dignity in simplicity. And nowadays, I really appreciate these words. And as I observe what's happening nowadays, sometimes I feel that we are lost in the new-built, expensive residential blocks or office blocks outside the historic center of Riga city. However, still, sometimes it seems like the uniqueness of the historic center remains unnoticed. And I will try to fit within the time allocated to me, so let me skip a couple of paragraphs, if you allow me. Of course, the state and municipal policy plays a crucial role, and when it comes to improving the urban environment, we must not only educate but also involve the youth, because working with youth is our chance to change their attitude without very expensive solutions. Interestingly, the Soviet architectural heritage somehow seems attractive to the youngsters because unlike the sterile white glass and concrete buildings, it's something different to them. Because these glass white concrete buildings simply remind us of the so-called Euro renovation. However, it seems that the startups tend to move rather to the brownside buildings, the former industrial buildings outside the city centers. It seems like sometimes also there is a lack of acceptance for new initiatives and ideas which would serve the interests of the society. Sometimes we look at the city center and we only think about how to preserve and also how to sell at a high price what we have there. But also, of course, we may learn from our Scandinavian colleagues, especially Copenhagen. Of course, we have the artistic city blocks which are actually preferred by the youngsters for their cultural and artistic activities. Maybe they could be compared to East London or Chelsea Market in New York. However, I'm happy to see that nowadays also the Cultural Heritage Board agrees that there has to be a new vision towards the future development. However, it seems like Latvia lacks, especially the general society, lacks the trust in public administration. Therefore, it's hard to achieve good results. And Einstein has said that you cannot solve problems with the mindset that has created these problems. And I'm not just talking about problems. The main thing is the mindset. If our cooperation doesn't change our mindset, we have little hope to achieve the results that we desire. And we would also fail to create synergies for tomorrow's cultural space. Of course, it's all very complicated, but at the same time it's important. We all understand that throughout the state and the city, we have different structures, we have different offices, bureaus that oversee all the steps of building process. However, quite often they give in to the pressure from the profit-driven building companies. However, what is the architectural heritage that we will leave to the next generations? For example, the way we heat insulate many public buildings in Riga, it's just preposterous. So, in conclusion, let me just point out that probably we all have heard about this Latvian cross-sectoral coordination center. Do you know this institution? We actually have this kind of institution, and it seems like this is one of the largest managers of state real estate. So we have a large state-owned managers of real estate with assets over 409 million. And if I had such assets, then I would say that, you know, if they, together with other state agencies, have failed to build the National Concert Hall, then probably we should follow the advice of Otto Scharmer to find the file the 5 core group people who would finally manage to build the National Concert Hall. Thank you.
Paldies, Kreisler kungs.
Thanks to Mr. Kreisler, core group and basketball. So these are two inspiring things, and I think that we always have to be aware of the bull having enough air in it, and to have a full-fledged reflection of our historic heritage. We have to speak also about archaeology, and also here we have new solutions, new innovative approaches, and here in Latvia for several years already is a member of Europe Archaeological Consilium, and so I think that the next speaker we can call a friend. Dear colleagues, I would like to give floor to President of the Europe Archaeological Consilium, Mr. Leonard de Witt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here with such eminent speakers in your program. I feel very honored and proud, I can tell you that. And I'm going to do an experiment. So I'll wake up. Of course, you've been listening with great interest to all the speakers, but wake up. Who of you are... What is the most important law in Latvia? The Constitution, right. Okay, all of you. Who knows what words of... does the Constitution of Latvia deals with heritage? Does somebody knows that? Yes. Which article? No, not the first one. The first one is it says that Latvia is a republic. Two people know a little bit about it. That's weird. We're here with people from Latvia who care about heritage, and they don't know what is in the constitution about heritage. They don't know. But don't be ashamed, this is the case in all European countries. But actually there is an article, I've been reading it, Article 115, the heritage is not mentioned, but it is relevant for the heritage. I will read it to you. The state shall protect the right of everyone to live in a benevolent environment. I would say cultural heritage is part of environment. By providing information about environmental conditions, and by promoting the preservation and improvement of the environment. This is written in the Latvian constitution. There are some more words. And I found another very interesting one in 105. Property shall not be used contrary to the interest of the public. That's interesting. It's in your constitution, these words. And it's also freedom of scientific research. That's in your constitution also. And I want to make 2 points now. And this experiment could have failed, but it didn't. My first point is that we are often overestimating the importance of legislation. Because if even you don't know what is in your law, who will know what is in your law? So we're putting all our faith within the law and then not using it. So that is overestimating what you think. And the other, so I can ask the same question about you. Latvia has been ratifying all the international treaties, like the World Heritage Treaty. Do you know what is in it? Do you? So, and that's my second point. If you don't know, these are dead words. And these words don't come alive by themselves. We need people to make these words to come alive. Okay, these points I want to make, and I could stop now, but that I prepared a bit more, so I'm here anyway. Okay. That was my experiment. Now I'm going to go back in time, and the year is 1945. In 1945, the leader of the Conservative Party of the UK returned from a conference in Potsdam with Joseph Stalin and Truman, dividing Europe. And Mr. Winston Churchill, because that was the leader of the Conservative Party, came back home and lost the elections. So he was the big man who won the war, and in June 1945 he lost the elections in the UK and Labour came to government. So Mr. Winston Churchill was very disappointed, of course, because he had an ambition. The ambition of Mr. Winston Churchill was not only to win the war and to beat the barbarism of Nazi Germany, but he had the ambition to build up a new Europe. And he thought, when I'm the leader of the UK, I will be in power and I can do that. And then after a while he went to Lago Maggiore and he went painting, and then he went to Switzerland on a holiday, and he spent some time with his wife, and he went painting again. Many paintings can still be seen. And then he thought, well, but I still have this ambition. So Mr. Winston Churchill, not being the leader of the UK anymore, took up a task. And that all came together at his famous speech for the academic youth in Zurich in September 1946. And then Mr. Winston Churchill said some words. I wish to speak about the tragedy of Europe, this noble continent, the home of... Well, I won't go on like that. As you all know, Mr. Winston Churchill spoke with a pretty strong Dutch accent. The home of, and then there come some words like that he's still proud of Europe, and I'm not going to repeat these words because Mr. Ballister went to these words. I don't know if he knows it, but culture is the pillar, is a pillar to build the new Europe. That is what you're saying, and actually that is what Mr. Winston Churchill was saying. So this is in a tradition, I would say. And he said, if Europe were once united in the sharing of its common inheritance, there would be no limit to the happiness, prosperity, and the glory with its 400 million people they would enjoy. And it's now 800 million people. And then he went on and said, we must build a kind of United States of Europe. That is what remember that. That is what the leader of the Conservative Party of the UK said in 1946. The leader of the Conservative Party and these words are not out of context. These words are true. These words are not out of context as Mr. Nigel Farage is trying to tell us. So, and then he said, he ended his speech with, therefore I say, let's Europe arise. And we need to go back to this kind of idealism, I think. Okay, I come back to this. Ladies and gentlemen, we are stuck in a world order with a nation built, it's a nation system we are stuck in. And we think that is a logical system, that is a logical world order, that we have all nations. But this is an invention. This nation-built system, it's just a system. You can do it otherwise. And actually, it's a European invention. Actually, it goes back to the Peace of Westphalia, 1648. And then after a devastating 30 years war, the leaders of Europe want to do it different. And then they came up with this idea of sovereignty, territorial sovereignty, the right of self-determination, and non-interference. So if we have the territories and we don't interfere with each other, we solve our problems. That was our reaction to a devastating war. Of course, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that, because you cannot solve certain kinds of things within nation states. There is an international community, and as the Romans said, whenever there is society, there is law. Whenever there is an international community, there is international law. And actually, we invented international law to repair this nation system. We have to repair it constantly. Of course, there are disadvantages to every system, the feudal system or a tribal system. There are big disadvantages to these systems, but we have to repair that. We have to repair that because we have to deal with war and peace. We want to have treaties, peace treaties. Even we have treaties how we are fighting a war, which if it wasn't that tragic, I would find it funny. We need a treaty because not every territory is within a sovereignty. There's the sea. Does anybody know how high is Latvia? Ever thought of that? How high Latvia? How deep is Latvia? Sometimes you have to deal with these issues. That's international law. And outer space, the American satellites are flying constantly over your head, over sovereign territory of Latvia. Do you allow them? Okay, ever thought of that? And of course, economics, that's a reason for international trade. It's trading all over the place. The environment, that's a reason why we need international law, and human rights. It's a relatively new one, human rights. And actually, these general reasons of having international law, they all link to what we have to do in heritage. These are normal reasons for international law, and they link to what is heritage. So, you have to deal with that, and a country like Latvia is, of course, a very active country within the international community. You joined UNESCO, you joined the NATO, you joined the Council of Europe, you joined the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and of course, it works in a way. So, as I was saying, I was overestimating law. You can underestimate it also, because it works. I could fly very easily to Latvia, thanks to international law. And now I want to go back to 1946, because at that moment there was idealism, and as Mr. Kreisler just quoted Einstein, I believe, because you cannot solve problems with the same mindset as the mindset that causes the problems. I don't know if the quotation is correct, but of course in 1946 there was a totally different mindset. And that's why, at that moment, people did things differently. Mr. Churchill came up with the concept of a supranational authority, the Council of Europe. He wasn't in pace with the French. Mr. Schuman came up with the idea of a European community on steel and coal, which, of course, are the means to fight the war. And these people, like Schuman, Monnet, De Gasperi, Henri Spaak, and Churchill, and Adenauer, not to forget Adenauer, these people overcame hate and revenge, and they want to build a new society. And we tend to forget that. Okay, I'll look a little bit at the time. So, there was a development. At the same time, we had the world that is very special also. It's very special. during wartime, it was the spring of 1945, the Allied forces gathered in San Francisco, United States, and they came up with UNESCO, United Nations, and they thought that education, culture, and science could prevent us to go to war again. So this was a total new concept. So, and these organizations are still there, and it's up to us. It's up to us what we do with these organizations. At this moment, I must say, organizations like the Council of Europe and UNESCO, I wouldn't say the EU, but are badly financed, understaffed, and that is not because of the organizations are bad. They want to do the right thing. I think they want to do the right thing. But that is because the nation states don't support them anymore. Where is this idealism? Where is this idealism? So we still, and it has been noticed before, and that's what a country like Latvia, the Baltic states, they joined later, and I got the feeling that there's still these thoughts are still living here. You've been under the Soviet regime for quite a long time, being part of the Soviet regime, and now joining this international community. And actually, we're looking a bit to you to keep these ideals alive, I would say. And of course, then the EU came. The UK didn't join the EU, and later on they wanted to join the EU, and then Mr. de Gaulle didn't let them. And finally, in 1973, I believe, they put out their flag, and now we're a member of the EU, and now they're going out again. So I don't know how that is going to work out. Okay. So this is what I want to say about this idealism and of the post-war period. Don't forget that. Okay, we as heritage managers, as people who care for heritage, we relate to this international law also. So what we have to do is and we come up with all kinds of conventions, and they all relate to the same ideas, and they all relate. So what I often see, what happens all over Europe is that heritage people who care for heritage, who don't get their way, that sometimes happens, Christina, you don't get it all. You're fighting for it though, we can see that. They're putting their problems on the table of UNESCO and the Council of Europe, who cannot deal with that. So it's not up to these abstract organizations what should happen, it's up to Mr. Chrysler. What's going to happen? We need a civil movement. We cannot... Having a government, having an international organization, doesn't mean that you're not responsible anymore. It's so easy. Say, well, they're not doing a good job. Well, it's too easy. It's too easy. Or what I just had a discussion in Barcelona at the European Archaeological Association, that there are all kinds of problems, and the solution is we come up with a new convention. We're going to change the Valletta Convention because it's not good enough. Well, that's not, but actually they didn't even know what was in the Valletta Convention. They just, it's too easy of a solution, just change the law. That doesn't work like that. That's your point also, I would say, Mr. Dambis. Although I must say, when the Latvian constitution is amended again, you have some very good thoughts, Mr. Dambis. And I would say time is a gift. I would say that is perfectly good for the Latvian constitution. So think of it. There are lots of things you said which should be in the Latvian, but then you all have to read it and remember it and make it alive. Otherwise, why we were engaging in this kind of activity. Okay, where am I? So this is my plea, being active on not only complaining, that's not enough, but form a civil society, and organizations, NGOs are important. They can, for us, I work for Dutch government, they can be a nuisance as well. I mean, oh my God, what? But they're important. And international organizations like ICOMOS and Europa Nostra, they are important, and they are important for the advocacy and the plea for good heritage management. They keep us alive, and of course, when you go to European Union, there's only one person of Europa Nostra who's pleading for the heritage measures as Christina is pleading. And at the same time, I know that 400 lobbyists from the German car industry are there as well. So but still, what we can, but we have authority. We have the authority of Winston Churchill. We have the authority saying, we are Europe, and this is what we are. This is what our development should be. And the wording of you, Mr. Dambis and Mr. Barrest, is quite, should be spread. These thoughts I really like. I'm looking at the time. Okay. So that was Mr. Churchill. That was the Latvian Constitution. I still got some remarks I want to make with you. Some advice, and I've written them down, so I'm not, I don't have to improvise. My first advice would use the tools you already got. There are good conventions, and I would say the European Council has come up with Granada, with the Valletta Convention, with Florence, with the Faro Convention. Make them alive. Use them as an argument. They're good. The Council of Europe has had a very important role, a pioneering role on these issues. Now, don't go and change these conventions. It takes you 25 years to ratify, to have them ratified by all other countries. They're good enough. And the Council of Europe was very wise to put the Faro Convention on top of it, on top of these conventions. But there are a lot of dead words in there, and it's up to us to make them alive. You have to know how these conventions work out in practice, and actually we don't know. I'm president of the European Archaeological Council. Actually, I think it's a successful convention, the Malta Convention, but I don't know. I got the feeling it's a successful convention. I know it has been important in the Netherlands, I know the Dutch situation, but I don't know. 45 countries have ratified the Valletta Convention. We just don't know. And the Council of Europe has a task in knowing, but they're understaffed, and they don't have money anymore. So organizations like the European Archaeological Council take it up to know, to get these information. And then you get the data, and you can remember influential people what actually we have agreed upon, because we tend to forget. As I was saying, it helps if you strengthen international organizations like UNESCO and the Council of Europe, as they're understaffed and badly financed, and don't complain about them, help them. It's easy to be cynical, But if you become cynical, then you don't change the world anymore. You're just being cynical. I gave you a better way of dealing with is longing. Feel and maybe sometimes it's naive, but naive is better than being cynical. Also use your influence on a national and local scale. You can be very, very busy to change the course of the European Union. Yeah. You've been busy a lifetime, I think, changing the course of the European Union. But often it might be a lot more effective and more close at hand to talk with your own government, own municipality, make NGOs a bit influential, and sometimes it doesn't help to go looking for Big Brother abroad. It won't help you. As I was saying, don't expect too much from government and international agreements. People have a tendency to put everything on their table. But you have to realize that government is formed by people as well, and I'm one of them. Government is, and you're one of them. That's government. Lots of people from government here in this room. We are people. We are not gods or wizards. And then I want to conclude, and of course I have to go back to Mr. Winston Churchill. And Christina, it's maybe a cry for nostalgia, as you were saying, but actually it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Remember, please remember, the ideals of the man and woman of the post-war period, because with a different mindset, they tried to do things differently, and actually they did things differently in a way, I would say, that never, as history has never seen before. The Western part, we dwell in peace and prosperity, and we have to thank the people who with the ideals of the post-war period. They did things differently, and we profit from it. Until this day on, we profit from it, and too often we tend to forget. Well, don't forget, and therefore I say to you, let Europe arise. Thank you.